Aisling and Erin here again on our second virtual walk in Cratloe. Today we're starting off at the Gullet Cross and we're going to be heading upwards towards Gallows Hill. A lot of people are very familiar with this stretch of road. It's often known as the Wall, and cyclists love it as a challenge. A lot of people will be familiar with places such as the Graveyard and Heathmount. However, as you can see from this map, we hope to bring you an awful lot more about different elements that are on this road and some of the folklore that goes along with it. We hope you enjoy our second virtual walk in Cratloe. The Gullet got its name due to the structure it holds over the water flow that comes down the mountain. At the time, water generally would flow over the roads. However, here, a man-made gullet was put in place so that the water could run under the road. This at the time would have been very unusual, and hence where this crossroads got its name, the Gullet. The Gullet is most famous for the memorial that is currently there in memory of Daniel Keane of Gallows Hill, who lost his life in the Titanic tragedy on the 15th of April 1912. This monument was actually erected 100 years later in 2012 to mark the anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. He was on his way to make his fortune in America, and according to folklore, the night before he left, his mother sewed 3 or 4 sovereigns into the belt of his trousers. If we look down at these stones here, these round stones, they're not native to Cratloe at all. They're actually from the Atlantic coast down near Liscannor, and they were purposely brought to link this monument to the Atlantic Ocean and the sea where Daniel lost his life. So this Gullet Cross was also very well known for dancing at the crossroads. Lots of dances would take place here because previous to that they would be in people's houses. However, the local priest didn't support this. He thought they were very inappropriate, and so he banished them, and everyone found themselves gathering at these crossroads in order to have great nights out. The first dance was back in the 1920s when local tradesmen put down concrete slabs in 1943, and the dancing continued into the early 60s. In 2012 it was revived again when this monument went up, and now Father Spade says Mass and has a great night with singing and dancing every year since then. They now use timber platforms made from Finn's Mill and 6 Mile Bridge in order to keep dancing at the crossroads. The Gullet Cross has been famous for a lot of other social gatherings throughout the years. The protest of the farmers in 1960 was a big event for local farmers. They were fighting for the price of their produce, and there was a big event happening in Dublin, so they gathered here at the Gullet Cross before marching all the way to Dublin. A few of them did get arrested, we won't name who. Also, the Liam McCarthy Cup in 2013 was brought here to the Gullet for a great night of celebration. Another great night of celebration was in 1984 with Diane Hannigan, when she celebrated being crowned the Rose of Tralee, and she's a local girl here. So we have been told that there's a song that has been sung and written about dancing at the crossroads. We haven't been able to find any information on this, so we really would appreciate if anyone had any information on this song to bring it forward. Another story that we've been told is that Little Church in 6 Mile Bridge was actually meant to be built here at the Gullet Cross. However, apparently influential people in 6 Mile Bridge convinced the priest that there was a lot more money to be got over there, and hence why Little Church is over in 6 Mile Bridge and not here at the Gullet. This area has lots of ghost stories linked to it, one of which is regards to a black carriage that apparently used to go at dusk from 6 Mile Bridge across through the Gullet and straight up towards Gallows Hill at full speed, where then it would just disappear. Locals don't know where the story came from. Was it there just to make sure everyone got in late at night? Maybe you know other significances of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Another story that we've been told is that Purcell Circus used to come here at the Gullet, and at the end, one night, the swing was taken down and 4 people carried it up the hill towards the graveyard, and apparently there was great talk afterwards about whose funeral it was and great gossip going on as to who had passed away the night before.
So this road, the Gullet, I'm not sure, like a lot of the locals would call the cross the Gullet, and then a lot of people would refer to the road as the Gullet as well. Okay, so and so lives up the Gullet, but the road in itself was actually a very important road in the time of Bianconi's coaches, which was in the early 1800s. This was actually the main Limerick to Ennis thoroughfare, so it was, and it would have gone down through the milling town of 6 Mile Bridge. Okay, so Bianconi's coaches would have come both ways, over Woodcock Hill and Gallows Hill and down through this road onto 6 Mile Bridge. until Studdards, a family in the Bunratty area, opened the bridge over the River Garney at Bunratty Castle in around 1820s. Not sure, but in around 1824, I think. And that then brought the main thoroughfare from Limerick to Ennis, where the main road basically is now. Okay, and gave a lot of popularity to Newmarket and Fergus as opposed to 6 Mile Bridge. Okay, but before that, this would have been the main thoroughfare for coaches and mail coaches, which also meant it was the main thoroughfare for looting for a lot of highwaymen and rapparees. And one famous one lived at the very, very end of this line near Barley Thomas Bridge, which is up over the mountain and down the other side, and he was known as Morrissey. And he sat up on a prominent rock, which became known as Morrissey's chair a little bit later on, and basically ambushed and looted a lot of the mail coaches. Legend has it that he gave to the poor. We don't know if that's true in the area. And when he was dying, he told his neighbours who were gathered around his bed that he buried a lot of the treasures that he claimed under one of the trees in Cratloe Woods with the Ace of Hearts carved on it. I've looked for it, I can't find it since. Now, a couple of hundred yards up the road, the first house that we see that dates back a long way is this here. Now, I've looked at maps from 1901 to 1913. That's the 25-inch OS maps. And this dwelling is on it. And it's in a kind of a courtyard with 3 houses facing into each other. But this looked like the main dwelling, and there was 2 outhouses either side. The name of the area, or the side of the hill, is known as Sean Higgs. And I don't know who Sean Higg was. I've looked up, I can't find the name in the 1901 or 1911 census, but if anybody out there can share the information about where or who Sean Higg was, okay, please forward it on to us. But this area on the side of the hill here, known as Sean Higgs. So just looking back down towards the Gullet Cross, on the right hand side, this is Keelty's. They beautifully restored the front of the cottage and they've built on behind it. But when I was growing up, this cottage was owned by Shaughnessy's, but the locals wouldn't say Shaughnessy, they say Shaughnessy's. And there was 3 brothers there, Martin, Tom and Paddy, I think. I'm open to correction on them. But it's the last house that I remember seeing in Cratloe that had a half door in it. Okay? And up until maybe the mid-2000s, that cottage and half door was still there. And half door, as many of the people looking in this would know, what I was told anyway, was to keep the hens out but the light in. Alright? There's an interesting anecdote about one of the Shaughnessy brothers as well. They were being robbed one night. Okay, one night. So thieves came into Cratloe and they would have had the old sash windows that you can lift up and down. And the thieves came away the first night without getting at them, but the Shaughnessy brothers were waiting for them the second night. This is all according to Joan McInerney. The second night the thieves came back, one of the brothers stood behind the window, saw the window, the sash window opening up, saw the hands coming in to lever themselves in, but whether it was Tom, Paddy or Martin anyway, grabbed the top of the sash window down and broke the arm of the thief, and they weren't seen around here again. So that cottage there was Shaughnessy's. Probably the last house here, apart from Sean Higgs, as we're coming down the Gullet. So on the right hand side, a little bit further up the hill, there's 2 giant cottages, which was actually quite popular around Cratloe. There's a lot of houses, even single houses now, that were once 2 houses joined together. But you can see the numbers on the front of these houses, 354, and we'll see another one, I think it's 353 on the other side. That, and I'm open to correction, is because these I think were land commission houses, which of course was a policy of De Valera's government, the first government in the state to give back some of the land to local farmers who didn't own it up to then, okay? So a lot of land commission houses would have been built around Cratloe at the time, but you can still see the clues of these 2 with the numbers 354 and 353 on them. Now this graveyard here was actually a church before, so when you come up a bit closer you can see the outline. They were the exterior walls of what was known as Kilfintonen Church. Kilfintonen was the old parish name for Cratloe. Meelick was known as Killeeny. And Kilfintonen, they believe the name comes from the Church of Fair Senan. So Kilfintonen. And if you look at some of the graves here, we know it as Kilfintonen Cemetery or Ballybrohan Cemetery because we're in the townland of Ballybrohan. Okay? You'll still see some of the names are the names that we're going to encounter that would have been in the old houses up along this hill. So Aisling tells me it's one of the smallest cemeteries existing in Ireland. And there has been recent burials here But what we are in now is the shells. We're inside the shell of the old Kilfinton church. If you go onto the ducas.ie website, this church is mentioned a good bit by the young scholars in the mid-30s in Cratloe. Now, they call it the Quillan or the Quilleen Cemetery, but the cemetery that I know nowadays as the Kylene Cemetery is the one on the left-hand side in Ballyledan as you're going in to 6 Mile Bridge, just at the Cratloe side of the little church. Now, whether Kylene is a small cemetery or a small church, and that's where they're getting the name from, it's very, very possible as well. Okay, there's a bit of a crossover there with the names, with the Duke's SS, but Kilfinton Church is what you'll find this cemetery as in the old maps in the early 1900s.
Kilfinton is the oldest church in Cratloe and in the townland of Ballybrocken. However, no saint named Fintan can be found in the Irish Book of Saints. The west gable of the church is destroyed almost to the foundation, while the east gable stands almost 4 feet high. However, all the architectural features are destroyed. The church was built of very large stones. However, no doors or windows remain. Reverend Joseph White, who wrote in 1658, "The parish church of Kilfinton was the chapel of St. Thomas, on the mountain at a place called Ballyclidan near Cratloe."
Some of the gravestones on it, there's no names on it all, they're just there to mark a grave even. Okay? And then some of them like McNamara's, Keen's and Shaughnessy, as we were talking about earlier, they're very familiar names around the parish as well. Okay, it's very, very well kept.
We were also told during our research that apparently there's a bishop who is also buried in the cemetery.
Now, there's nothing that stands out of historical note right here where we're standing at the moment, apart from these old mature trees, okay? But in fact, I'm standing on a spot here in the middle of the road. Now, if I was agile enough, I'd spread myself into 4 points. But this is actually where I am now, where 4 townlands come together and meet at a corner, okay? And the boundary is there because that field exists in the old maps from the 1800s and early 1900s, the old OS maps. At this side of those trees is Carramore. So as we're looking back down to the cross on the left hand side is Carramore. That's a large townland. It takes its name from Carruvur, which is the large quarter, okay, and it traverses the road on off in towards 6 Mile Bridge. Over on the right hand side across from it is the townland of Ballybrohan, Baile O'Bruchan, which means the townland of the stream, where the old cemetery and church we've just been at gets its name from. If we turn around then and we look up the hill past these 2 boundaries here, the row of trees and the stone wall, at this side here is Gallows Hill. Now, Gallows Hill, of course, because a lot of people maybe misname the mountain, the full mountain, as Gallows Hill, even down as far as Cratloe village. It's actually not that big a townland. It's only on the left hand side as we go up this road. And then back on the right hand side is the townland of Heathmount, from here all the way up to Willie Coughlin's, where the road turns back after the gallows down towards Cratloe. So we're at that point. Isn't there a place in America where the states all meet and you can touch 4 or 5 states? Well, this is our equivalent in Cratloe. Heathmount, Gallows Hill, Carramore and Ballybrohan. Now, when we talk about blinker you'll miss it kind of heritage, this is an example of it. This is an old hay turner made by agricultural manufacturers from Lincolnshire in England. They were called Blackstone. Maybe some of our older listeners and fans might have heard of it. Blackstones of Stamford. Now, they're based in Stamford Town, which is in Lincolnshire in the East Midlands, not far from Leicester City in England. And I looked them up online. Now, they've ceased trading as an agricultural machinery firm. But one of the last things they made when they finished and ceased trading in the 1920s was artillery shells in World War I. So you can kind of see this was one of their products, which was a hay turner, which is hidden in the ditch nowadays, okay, and that would have been tackled to a horse, okay, and I think there was rowing fins off at either side as well to be able to put the hay in rows, okay. But an example and a throwback to how they farmed, especially on hilly ground up here in the Gullet. So on the left hand side, just as we're coming into the steep incline in the hill, this one time belonged to McNamara's. It belonged to Fahey's after that, but McNamara's owned it initially. And a neighbour here, Flann O'Reilly, told me that a McNamara man, during the famine, took a sledgehammer under his coat, went into the local workhouse in Limerick and made smithereens of a soup bowl. So it'll show you the agitation that was there between the natives and the people who put in the soup kitchens. But I don't know what truth there is to the story, but Flann seems to know and has done a good deal of research on it. But anyway, this hole in the ditch, there was a dwelling in there. You can kind of see the way the ditch is shaped around where the dwelling would be, and at one time it would have been McNamara's, later owned by Fahey's. So like we said, there's very little clues that anything is left of Matty McNamara's house or dwelling, only this small little plot of land here. But there is still an external wall, whether they're pillars or anything, just out beside the road here. We know that he was here in the run-up to the famine, because in the Teeth allotment books, where he was paying his rent from 1823 to 1837, it does record his name. And there's a wall that can be seen if you ever put your head or hand just inside this bush. So the house might have been just very close and hard by the road here, okay? But there is a little surprise underneath the growth here as well. If we look for it, there's actually more than a wall. I could be in the wrong place here now, looks like I am. It's actually here. There's more than a wall left of the dwelling. There's a little red garden gate, as you can see as well. Now that was probably from a house after the McNamara's time, maybe owned by the same family or ancestors of the same family. There's a little hidden treasure up the gullet, a little red garden gate going into a house where Matty McNamara's once was. Now this for me is the jewel of the crown up in the gullet. The beautiful Heathmount Lodge with its ornate large windows facing over Carramore and 6 Mile Bridge down below. And it's lovely, I don't know, is that Georgian style? I'm not sure. With a lovely arched window on top of the main door. Okay, and now you'll be able to tell me what style it is when I tell you that the lodge itself was built in the 1700s. Okay, because Mikey Coughlin, now the owner of the property, did a lovely restoration job, archways and things like that, about 10 or 15 years ago, and added in that lovely plaque there that says Heathmount Lodge. I don't know too much about the history of the house. We can add that in later. But you can see it was cut into the land. There's a lovely reinforcement wall at the back of it where the hill sweeps down towards it, okay? And another interesting and not that well-known detail about Heathmount Lodge is that there's a lovely bridge here at the back of it going over the stream that flows under the Gullet Cross, okay? Now I was here last week when there was a great fall of rain, and this stream really has a big flow on it. But another little secret, yet again, of Heathmount Lodge is the right of way up at the back of it. Okay, you'll see a road that came in off the gullet where they came, and it continues on past the lodge, alright, and up that passageway there.
Actually, Aaron, this is actually a relief road due to the fact that when horses and carts full of turf were going up from the Gullet up to Gallows Hill, after this point it just was too steep. So the horse would buckle and sure everything would fall off it. So they used this road instead.
John Hargrove was a very interesting man, okay? He was heavily involved in athletics. He came out of Kilkishen, first of all, okay, and married in down here in Cratloe. He was a stonemason by trade. He built what we call the schoolmaster's house, or Welch's at Welch's Cross. He's also responsible for the building of Kilmurray National School above 6 Mile Bridge. And he also, as maybe an elderly man, supervised the building of the boundary wall around the grotto when they built it in the late 1930s. He died fairly soon after. But as I say, his real pastime was in the field of athletics. And there was a letter of support from him for none other than Michael Cusack read out in Hayes' Hotel in 1884 at the founding of the GAA meeting, where he apologised that he couldn't be there but gave Michael Cusack and the founding of the GAA his full support. John Ryan has done an awful lot of research on John Hargrove and believes him to be a founding member of Cratloe GAA Club. He was also heavily involved in politics and was a member of the the Irish Parliamentary Party. Another cousin of his, and I think also called John Hargrove, born in Kilkishen, emigrated to the United States, and if I'm not mistaken was elected into the House Senate over there as well for, was it maybe Minnesota or Wisconsin. And obviously the lineage for politics is good, because their great grandson, or this John Hargrove's great grandson, is none other than Cratloe, our local County Clare TD nowadays. So a fascinating man, okay, who is joined by nothing else, only a right of way and a little secret roadway to this lovely Heathmount Lodge that we had just come upon here, about halfway up the Gullet.
Heathmount Lodge was the home of the Fernell family in the early 1800s. Captain Thomas J. Fernell of the 57th Regiment to be exact. He married Arabella Wallace and they lived here with their 8 children. The owner of the premises today, Mikey Coughlin, believes it was their summer residence and a hunting lodge where the family may have stayed while hunting grouse on the mountainside. Despite the large family, no trace of the Fernells remain in Cratloe, and the house and land has since been owned by 3 generations of the Coughlin family. Thomas Fernell was a 3rd son of the notorious Michael Fernell of Ballyclough in the South Liberties barony of County Limerick. In 1792, Michael famously challenged Henry Vereker of Roxburgh to a pistol duel over a dispute from the sale of a horse. In the duel, Fernell's pistol ball hit Vereker in the thigh, resulting in his death 6 days later. The incident didn't seem to affect Fernell's job prospects, however, as he later became a High Sheriff and a Justice of Peace for both Limerick and later on Clare.
So we're about halfway up the hill now, and now is as good a time as any to get a nice view of what the residents are spoiled at looking out at every morning up here in the Gullet and Gallows Hill. And now is a good time to notice something you might notice on the Old West maps as well. And there's 2 of them marked on this road. One of them is just down there where the bend in the road is nearest to me, across from Heathmount Lodge. It's a lime kiln. Now I knew nothing about what lime kilns were, but they were nearly so plentiful. You'd come across one every couple of 100 yards in Cratloe in the 1800s and early 1900s. So what they were basically, and there would have been all different types and sizes, but they did one up recently enough in Kilmurray, I think. And basically they would have put a pit into the ground, and they would have put whatever local stone they had around it and dug down into the ground. So it could have been like a capped hole in the ground with a wall, a reinforced wall around it. And they would have lit timber inside in that, and they would have put limestone. Now limestone isn't the native stone in Cratloe, and certainly not this part of Cratloe. You don't come into a seam of limestone until you go beyond 6 Mile Bridge, okay? But they would have brought limestone in, and they would have basically burned it at a very high temperature, and they would have broke it down into a fine powder, and that would have made lime. Now lime was used mainly for 3 different things. The first thing was spreading on the land because it encourages growth, and I don't know what the word is, but it takes the acid out of the soil, okay? So that's one use for limestone. So is that reduce or heightens the pH in the soil? Someone into their chemistry would have to tell me there. The second reason for it is whitewash of houses. So that powder would have been wet, and it would have been put on a brush, and they would have whitewashed outhouses and cottages with it. And the third one then, it's a great antibacterial agent to put down on bedding of a cow house, okay? So if it got into cow's cuts or anything, it cleans out any sores they would have had. So they would have put it down on hay and straw as bedding as well. So lime kilns were quite plentiful if you look back. So I'm on the land now of Christy McInerney, okay, and where you see this kind of grouping of trees here, there was a homestead here of Keens. Now it's not the Keens that were involved in the Titanic. Would you believe, according to the locals up here, there was 2 Keens, and they believe not related, as far as they know, side by side with each other, okay? So we'll just have a look at where, this was Jimmy Keens. So Jimmy lived here, lived with his sister, and if you just look over the edge here, the roadway into Jimmy's house would have come up along there. You can still see the cut down from the field, so, and out there, okay? So that's coming in off the Gullet Road. The roadway came in along here. And interestingly, it came around this way right? And the homestead was there. So it was kind of like, as they called it, a street. You'd pull across in front of the house, and you can see these on maps here, right? But what's interesting, if you mind, are putting in here. Now all the stone from the house would have been here and it's gone away. But if you just point the camera over here, you'll see a bit like we showed you back in Heathmount Lodge, where the yard for the front of the house was cut down into the ground from the field around it. And look what still survives here in Jimmy Keane. A lovely stile to get up onto the front haggard on the front field. Okay? Alright? When it's in off the road, you'd never see that. But this was Jimmy Keane's around us here. Alright? Now the other Keanes, Daniel Keane, who's the monument is to down at the Gullet Cross, came from just over the hedge. Okay, now Healy's live there now, but there would have been a house just over the hedge from that, and that was Keane's. Now the O'Gormans, Jackie and Mick and so on, who still live in Cratloe nowadays, their mother was a Keane there. I'm open to correction, was it Margaret Keane was their mother? But she came out of there, okay? And Daniel Keane was related to them. Now Daniel didn't appear in the 1901 census or the 1911 census, okay? He would have been only a young fella, but he got up and got himself a job, and quite a good job actually. He was a tram driver, a tram conductor on the Dunleary line or the Donnybrook line in Dublin. And because of that, of course, he was able to save a few bob to find his fortune in America. And he did, and he was going to, I think the end of his destination was going to be St. Louis, Missouri, and he got on the Titanic at Queenstown in Cove in Cork. And then off he went across, of course, but never made it to America and went down with the Titanic. And if he drowned, well, his body was never recovered. So we know no more about Daniel Keane, okay? I was told only this morning by a neighbour who met us at the bottom of the road that there are 3 known people who were on the Titanic from Clare that we know about. Flann O'Reilly, who just lives up the hill from where we are here now, said there was a neighbour of his and a farm that his father bought, Hurley, back near Ballinacally. There was one of them. There was a lady who only passed away a couple of years ago in New York who survived the Titanic from fecal. And of course, there was our own Daniel Keane, who still has family in the area. Okay, and his house would have been just over that ditch, and where we are now, around here where the walls, was owned by Jimmy Keane. Just as we're coming out of the Keanes, alright, straight away after it, if we look in between, we'll see a double ditch there, okay? So there is a passageway down there, and that was a right of way. Now a lot of the glens here have a spring or a well at the bottom of them. The land in beyond this is again belonging to Christy McInerney, but there's a right of way that goes over the boundary of about 2 fields from here, and we don't know where it leads to on the older West maps, but there are springs and wells down at the bottom of the hill, and most likely it would have been for locals to bring water from the wells. There's a lot of wells up this road, and we are up at the side of a mountain, and you'd see it all on a rainy day, the amount of water that falls down here. But there's wells left and right of us, a lot of them now overgrown and inland, we'll say, in off the road a bit, but there are quite a few of them here, and they're all there evident on the old OS maps.
We're now coming into the yard of Christy McInerney. However, our next story is about 2 older families, the O'Maras and Liddy's.
Only recently, Christy's son Brian told me a story about this. See that galvanized shed there? And if you look closely, you can see where the mortar is hiding, where there was cutouts for windows. One there, and one over here as well. Okay? Now, this was a house belonging to Alice Liddy. Okay, now her mother would have been an O'Mara. This was O'Mara's one time. Okay, and Alice Liddy was born a frail child, and her mother and father were going to go and emigrate to the States for a better life, but they left Alice behind her. They didn't think she'd be able for the journey, and they left her behind her to be reared, as was common at the time, by her uncle, a Con O'Mara. Okay, but unfortunately Alice's mother died in the States, and for whatever reason the father was unable or never did come home. So Alice was left here, and you know, she took after the yard and things. Eventually she was taken in by Joan McInerney, okay, who's up the hill here, alright, and she lived out her days with Joan McInerney. But you will find Alice as a young scholar in the 1901 and 1911 census. She lived into her 80s and died in around the mid-1980s. Okay, and I often heard Brian and Chrissy talking about bringing cattle to Alice's Hills, which is over the other side of the mountain. So it is an example of field names which you'll never find on maps, only through word of mouth a lot of the time, being very important about telling us stories of our past. This house would belong to Alice Liddy, okay, and even the name Liddy wasn't her original name, she was O'Mara, but the field Alice's Hills still remains to give us a clue about her. Now, we're nearly at the very, very top. Now, people that live up at this end of the parish are more conditioned to this than I am, hence the breathlessness. But it reminds me of a story about Danny Mac. Now, Danny Mac was the postman in Cratloe, but you'll remember him from our previous video being the blacksmith in the forge in Cratloe Cross. So Danny Mac, anyway, was a character. Like I said, I have hundreds of stories about him and I never even met the man. But he was a postman, and on a Monday morning, maybe a bit worse for wear or tired, he was coming up the gullet with a bag of post, and where he was going was over this road here at this crossroads, which is into Bunnabinna, probably into the O'Neills. Bunnabinna is the last outpost in Cratloe, if you like, but you have to come up this big steep hill to get to it. And then he met a neighbour out of breath, and he says, "Well, Jesus," he says, "that Michael Collins, he's an awful lot to answer for," he says. And the neighbour goes, "Why, Danny, why's that?" He goes, "To think," he says, "that he gave away the 6 counties, but the held on to f***ing Bunnabinna," he says. So that'll tell you, Danny didn't appreciate the trip up the gullet, and it is tough, but it opens up the lungs. So we're nearly at the very, very top of it now.
So that's Bunnabinna over to that side. That's Woodcock Hill. And then the road down to Cratloe then.
Now, I have a quiz question for all the quiz buffs out there just before our last stopping point on the gullet. Okay? If I asked you what townland in Cratloe is the Gallows that was up here situated in, well, can you answer it? I'm sure an awful lot of you would say Gallows Hill, but in fact it's not. Because like we learned down the road up here is the boundary. Okay, so we're actually in the townland of Heathmount now. So Gallows Hill is that green field across the road. That's actually Gallows Hill. The Gallows itself was not in the townland of Gallows Hill, it was in Heathmount. So mind your step, come up to the summit where the Gallows was. Over the years I know a lot of the good neighbours. A friend of mine, even Paul Cherry, I remember, cleared all this away himself one time. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Shannon Development, or we call them, own this. But if you can see, there are still flagstones up here that were put down to make it easier for people to come up, and there's a few back this way as well. So there was steps, but from what I can remember, the steps go down that way, down into the briars. Okay, and there's a nice one here, we'll get a picture of it later, that was put up by a local heritage group and called Crow TD. We'll put it up there just to signify where the gallows was. Now, I don't know if this is piseog or not, but when I was small, there was 2 holes like this here, and they reckoned that's where the gallows poles were. There was 2 of them. And I have a little story to finish off our trip on that, told to me by Joan McInerney. Joan is 89, down the road, so knows everything that's happened up in this hill. And when she was young, or just newly moved to Cratloe, she was told that there was once a member of the gentry who had a big house somewhere in Cratloe, and a servant or a butler was combing the old man who was lord of the manor, or you know, owned the gentry house, combing his hair one day anyway, and the comb went missing. And so the old man anyway got the butler, who he suspected of taking the comb, arrested. Okay, and the police arrested him, and a priest was even called, but there was no sign of the comb, and the servant was protesting his innocence. and it was no good anyway. So the priest tried to convince the guards that this man says he's very innocent, and he says, if we find out that he is innocent and you hang an innocent man, the holes of that gallows in Gallows Hill will never close in. So we're looking at one of them, we believe, here, and there might be another one filled in, but the man was duly hung anyway. But the story goes anyway that the old man of the house later on found just down on the hem or the collar or the cuff of his trousers a couple of days later found the comb. So whether it's true or not, who's to say? It's a bit of piseogry maybe, but it's a nice story just to finish off at the very top of Gallows Hill, going across the journey and a little bit of heritage that we had a look on today.
Equally, if you have any extra stories or photos to add to this, or any changes of different versions of stories, we'd really appreciate if you let us know.